everyone, it's Margaret with Creative Stamping with Margaret. Thanks for joining me today. We are working on one of the cards from the October 2023 card classes. For the month of October, the cards were themed all about autumn, and when I think of autumn, I think of apples. Of course, we think of pumpkins and so forth, and different squash, winter squash, but I do like to think of apples because apple harvest does come in a lot during the month of October. And speaking of apple harvest, that's the name of the stamp set that we're using on our card today. You will notice I have two samples here, and I'll lift this one up a little bit closer to the camera and tilt it so you can see that it has been texture embossed. This was the first card that I made, and after I did that I thought, oh, it's just missing a little something, and so I remade the card and texture embossed it. So that is an option for you. You can do either one. And for our apples, we are doing watercolor technique on that. So we're using the watercolor paper. So I'm going to give you some tips for watercoloring and using the watercolor brushes. So let's get started. Now, if you are one of the individuals that have ordered the monthly card kit to go, you will have received a kit as such, and in that kit you will have your real red card base. You're also going to have a piece of basic white for the interior, then a smaller piece for the front of the card. You'll also have your layering panel of basic black. You will have a strip of real red, and that is the background piece for your sentiment. You'll also have a strip to stamp your sentiment on, as well as a square of the watercolor paper from Stampin' Up. If you did not order a kit, don't worry, I will have the materials used and the dimensions that I have cut these layers in the description of this video. So you don't have to worry about taking notes on what all is needed for the card. As far as inks, we are using Cherry Cobbler, Early Espresso, and Garden Green for our watercoloring. You're also going to need your Stays On ink pad because the Stampin' Up inks are water-based, so we need to use a solvent ink that will stand up to water. But I'm also using Memento, and I've used Memento to stamp my sentiment and the background piece that I have done on the card, as well as on my envelope, and I also carried that theme through on the interior of the card. So let's go ahead and get started. You will also need a watercolor brush. The watercolor brushes come in a pack of 3, and you can decide which ones you want. One is the wide tip, one's a more fine tip, and then the middle. I've got just 2 of them here. I also like to have a little cup with just a little water in it. You are also going to need just a clear block. This isn't necessary, but I use it for my paint palette, and that's to put the ink on, and I'll show you how we go about doing that. And then with watercolor, I find it always handy to have a paper towel. The stamps you'll be needing from the stamp set, you will need the bunch of apples that are hanging on the tree, and then you'll need the individual single stamp. So let's go ahead and stamp our background. And this I just randomly stamped And what I like to do whenever I am stamping inking up a large stamp, I like to apply the ink to the stamp versus the stamp to the ink. It's just a little bit easier, I find, to get a good coverage. Particularly with these Memento or say the Stays On inks that are a little bit different ink pad, type of ink pad. And we're just going to randomly stamp. We'll do 4. I think 4 will give us a good coverage. And we'll just stick a little edge on that piece. While I have this out, I'm going to go ahead and just stamp up in the corner of my card interior. I have a little something on the stamp. Let me, piece of paper, get that off so I get good coverage. Set that to the side, and you can do the same thing on your envelope. Let's see, where did I put the envelope that went with the set when I was pulling all of the pieces out? Here it is. And I'm just going to do that down on the bottom edge. That to the side. Then I'm going to go ahead and pull in my sentiment and stamp that. And I decided to use the Hope You Are Feeling Better sentiment. There are other sentiments in this set. There's a Thanks for Your Kindness, and the greatest gift is a good you. And of course you can always select a sentiment from another stamp set if you want, but I have needed some Hope You're Feeling Better cards, or some cards to send to individuals that have been a little under the weather, so I thought it would be nice to have a stash of those in my card stack. Then I'm going to set these to the side, and let's go ahead and start with our watercoloring. It does take a few moments to dry each layer. You can bring in your stamp or your heat tool. Let me pull up and I'll show you. You can always just use your heat tool to dry in between the layers, which I will talk about as we get to that point. So I have used Stays On ink to ink up the apple, and I'm going to press and hold this on my watercolor paper, and I'm adding a little bit of pressure, but I'm being careful not to rock it because I don't want to smear it. But the watercolor paper does have a texture to it, and plus it's a little bit heavier, so by having a little bit longer contact with the paper, it ensures that there's a better transfer of the ink onto the paper. And you can see how that is. That's actually a little light. Let me flip that over and re-ink and try that again. Ink up my stamp a little bit better. I think I did not double check this ink pad, and I probably needed to add a little bit of refill ink to it. There again, I'm adding the pressure and pressing down and holding and making sure that I can transfer that ink. And there, that is better. I can tell that that's a little bit better. So now I'm going to pull in my cherry cobbler. I'm going to start with the cherry cobbler first. And this is where I am using just a clear ink block. This is an ink block that came with one of the kits that Stampin' Up sells. So I just am placing my ink there. The old style ink pads that Stampin' Up had were easy to press on to transfer ink, and you would just use your top. And actually I have one of those here. Let me pull it out and show you. And that makes a great, that was pretty much how we would use that as our little ink holder, but I find it a little bit harder on these newer ones to do that. So I'm pulling in one of the water brushes, and I have already squeezed this and gotten it wet. Now, one of the key things that I like to do when I'm watercoloring, and that is the area that I'm going to be coloring, first I lay down a little bit of water. And I don't think you can see this on camera, but I'm laying this water down. I'm not covering the leaf. I'm only doing the portion of the apple that I'm going to lay ink down on first. This helps with getting the ink to spread when I put it down on the apple. And plus, you just get a little bit better control of the color. You want to be careful. You don't want to put too much down. You don't want to, just soak it through and through. But remember, the water is going to take that ink and spread it. So now I'm going to my little paint palette here, and I'm picking up some ink. And I like to dab first just on the corner of where I'm working to see. And then I'm just going to start. And you notice I haven't gone all the way to the line, because look, that water that we've put down is pulling that ink. It's pulling it to the side. So I'm just going into the area. And the nice thing about watercoloring is you sort of build layer upon layer. Now, one of my ladies that used to attend my classes in Eatonton, where I live, her husband does a lot of watercoloring, and he would watercolor a lot of images. So, Benita, if you're watching this video, I'm sure that Phil can give you some really good tips on watercoloring. Or I wouldn't be surprised if he just says, I'll watercolor it. He's a beautiful artist. But you notice I've started and I'm sort of following the colors where it's darker on the apple, where the stamp has laid down where our shading would be, and that's where it's a little bit darker color. And then I just keep building right, layering right, one on top of the other. And I'm going to clean my brush a little, and I'm going to lay down some more water over here because of course that's already dried. But we just keep going about this method. And you notice I'm just staying right inside that edge because that water initially is going to take that ink and spread it. And then I just keep building color on top of color. And you can go as light or as dark as you want. And then of course here around the leaf I'm going a little bit darker, but you notice how that spread out. Now I'm just going to pull all of that down. I'm going to keep pulling, and if my brush starts getting dry, I'm going to take and I'm going to just squeeze and release some more water. This is where a paper towel is handy. And you just start pulling that ink. Now this area here, let me pull in a card to show you. I am leaving that a little bit lighter because that's where I imagine that the light would be shining on the apple. Plus, if you look at an apple closely, there's a lot of variation in color. It's not like they're a solid red. So I'm just doing that shading. A fly that's flying around me that wants to get on camera. Where are you? There. Seems like with the change of weather, we've had just gorgeous weather here in Georgia, that some of the insects have decided they want to come inside where it's a little bit warmer, but that's where the exterminator has come in handy. And then at this point, I would take my heat tool and I would go ahead and use that to dry this before I go on to the next section, or dry it and see if I want to add more color. But I think I'm going to be safe to go ahead and put a little bit of water on the stem. And for the stem, I've used Early Espresso. And I'm going to take my same pad and I'm just going to, just takes a tiny bit on that edge. So there is our apple stem. And since this leaf is not joined against where this red is that I'm waiting to dry a little bit more, we can go ahead and lay our water layer down and pull in our garden green to color it. You can see how the water that I laid down, along with the water that's at the end of my brush, is helping the ink to spread. So here we have that. Now I'm just going to continue building till I get the color of green that I would like. I'm going to lay down just a little bit darker right around where the shadow would be from that part that's curled up. Now our apple feels like it's pretty dry, so I'm going to go in and let's do our other leaf. And of course I'm doing this a little rushed, so I haven't taken the time that I normally would, because I will go back and add more red to deepen this apple color. I think you understand, sort of get a feel for how to go about doing that. We're going to lay in a little bit deeper red here. And then I just keep building layer upon layer. And it really doesn't take a lot of water. Once you get the brush wet, it tends to stay rather wet, and then you notice I just pick up a little bit more, and I'm just continuing with that cherry cobbler red just to build and give me the color that I would like my apple to be. But you do have to let it dry between the layers, because what happens then is, if you don't, is it just really gets harder and harder to get a contrast. And then I'll set that off to the side and let it dry. I'm not going to use my heat gun. That just makes so much noise. Let me go ahead and place a paper towel over this so I don't end up getting it all over. And I still ended up with ink, red ink on my fingers, but I'll wipe that off there. Now, if you bought the dies, the apple, I believe they were called, they might have been called Apple Harvest dies or the Apple Blossom dies. I have forgot what they were called. Then you absolutely can use that die to cut the apple. But since those dies are no longer available, I'm going to fussy cut to show you just how easy it is to fussy cut those the apple to place on your card. So you'll just take your paper snips or your whatever little scissors you have. I just love these scissors, these little paper snips from Stampin' Up. I think I have at least 4 or 5 pair of them. I have them in several different areas. I use them for a variety of things, not just my crafts. I even use a pair with my sewing. I have it at my little sewing table because occasionally I do like to sew, and these are really handy. Snip this one off. I'm going to go just go around our stem here. And as you can see, when I'm fussy cutting, I'm getting in much closer than if I were using the die to cut. It does leave a little bit more border. And you could also leave more border around if you were fussy cutting if you wanted. But you need to just clean up the edge of this leaf here. So there. And I keep trimming. That's the nice thing about with the paper snips. So now let's just assemble our card. So you're going to bring in your card base, and we're going to use our bone folder to ensure that we get a nice crease. Bring in the pieces that we have prepared earlier. Our layering piece, and I am going to use one of the, I'm using the little cross hatch embossing folder that's from the Basics 3D embossing folders, which are available online. It's called an online exclusive. The only thing that means is that you will be able to find this product online. It is not in a print catalog. You know, it's just like a lot of businesses. They don't carry all of their products in their catalogs or in their stores, but you can order them online, and that's what the online exclusives are. So let me just pull in my cut and emboss machine, and with embossing you would need your gray folder and then base plate number 1, and that is it. So we put those in. Let me just crank this through. Now if you ordered the kit, I did not do the texture embossing because you will need to stamp it. You can use any embossing folder that you have. One of these background pieces would look are nice, but you can also, just like the first one of the cards that I showed that I made, I did not texture emboss, so they look beautiful either way. And when I texture emboss, I do like to use a strong adhesive to ensure that it holds the paper in place and we get good contact. And I like to rub my hand over that, and that just helps spread that adhesive underneath. We're going to put adhesive on the back of our basic black layering panel. Same thing, we're going to just center that onto our card front. You'll pull in your sentiment and the layering piece that it will go on. Just cut a little angle, and then we're going to place that right onto the real red. We'll place the sentiment on there, get that lined up and centered. And then to attach this to the card, I did use dimensionals. And the same for the apple, but now the apple is going to overlay a portion of that, so I'm only putting dimensionals on the outside, and then I am going to place just a little piece. Let's see, here I have the small dimensional, the mini dimensional on the leaf, but this will overlap onto that piece, so you don't want the sentiment panel, so you don't want the apple to have a dimensional on that portion of the apple, because you want it to lay down nice and flat like so. And you could put a mini glue dot there, which is what I'm going to do. Just put a little glue dot. So there, we have completed our apple harvest card. I hope that you've enjoyed learning some tips for watercoloring. Again, my name is Margaret Knight. I'm an independent Stampin' Up demonstrator, and I hope that you like this video. If you would, just hit the like. And while you're at it, if you've not done so, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. And be sure to check out my blog. On my blog, you will find the area where you can order my class to go kit, so that you can get the materials sent to you, so that you can use your stamps to create the cards. Again, thanks for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day.